I'm joined now by Andrew Brookes of the housing team at Anthony Gold Law to talk about the issue of condensation and mould in rental properties. And Andrew, this is an issue that crops up a lot on property tribes, that landlords here report from tenants that there's a problem in the property, and it is an issue that landlords must take seriously, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. It is a common problem, and it's one of those things where landlords will often say that it's all the tenant's fault. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. But if action isn't taken, then the tenants can go to the local authority's environmental health department, and then, of course, that can cause additional problems.
So I think the first thing for the landlord to do is establish if the problem is being caused by the tenant not using the property in the correct manner. So how would they go about that?
So landlords, I think, need to educate their tenants a little bit about this issue and make sure that the tenants understand that they need to ventilate property properly. And also there are certain things which commonly cause condensation problems. So the classic one is drying wet clothes without ventilating the property properly while doing so, or having a tumble dryer and not venting it to the outside so the moist air remains in the property. However, so educating the tenants about that is important. However, it is also the case that some properties are prone to condensation due to design problems, and the problem can be quite severe even if the tenant is using the property properly, and it is in that case that landlords need to be aware that there may be additional issues down the line if nothing's done.
Quite, and we want to stress that mould and condensation are extremely detrimental to tenants' health, particularly elderly and children, and it's not something to ignore. The tenant has the right to go to the environmental health department and make a complaint about the property, and if that happens, it can actually result in some quite significant fines to the landlord, as we've heard recently on Property Tribes.
Well, that's right. So if the tenant makes a complaint and the local authority inspects and they find the situation is bad enough to be what they described as prejudicial to health, then what's likely to happen is that the local authority will write a warning letter to the landlord, giving a period of time in which to resolve the problem, and landlords will be well advised to nip the problem in the bud and deal with it at that case, because if nothing is done and the local authority escalate the situation, serve a formal notice, there can even be a prosecution, and now the fines are unlimited.
And are you finding that local authorities are much more sort of diligent in this regard? Because I don't know if it's just me, but I seem to be hearing a lot more about them taking action against landlords that aren't dealing with this problem.
I think that's right, and I also think that they are starting to impose financial penalties even for serving an initial notice, so that they will charge a landlord for that. So it is very much a question of nipping the problem in the bud, making sure the problem goes away at an early stage.
No, I totally agree. So I think, to summarise, what we would say is the first port of call is to educate the tenant to use the property correctly and ventilate the property, and we actually have a guide that you can download that you can give to your tenants to make sure that they use the property correctly. And if it's a much more deep-seated problem, then landlords need to look to such resolutions as some of these devices that can be put into a property. I think we've got discussions about New Air and Envirovent are the main ones, and they can be put into the property and make sure that it's ventilated correctly and solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the most deep-seated condensation problem can usually be sorted out. There are lots of products on the market which can be used to resolve the problem, the result being that you get a much better flat, get a much better rental, and much happier tenants.
Thank you very much for joining us. That's a very interesting topic, and it does come up from time to time on Property Tribes. So I think it's really good that we've stressed the importance of taking mould and condensation seriously. Thank you, Andrew.